Hi, Dr. Ron England here, and this is one of the JavaScript basic lectures, and what we're going to talk about here is variables, scoping, and the document object model, and a little bit on function calls. So what I'm going to do here is I've got this, I'm working inside of JS Fiddle. I like to work inside of JS Fiddle. One thing to note about JS Fiddle is that in the case of the options that I've set here is this is my JavaScript window and this is my HTML window. But what really would happen if you were putting this in a web page is this entire section would be inside the script tags inside of an HTML document, and this part here would be inside of the body. Okay, now you can actually tell it to emulate where you would put the script tags, whether it's within the body of the HTML or whether it's within the header of the HTML. This is some of the options that you have inside of JS Fiddle. But for demonstration purposes, JS Fiddle is excellent because I can put pieces of code up there that not only can you view the video, but you can actually go and play with the code itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run this. So it's just basically loading up the HTML page. And I have 4 buttons, and the 4 buttons are basically going to show the number entered into here in different ways. So this first button says show global. What we're going to do is we're going to declare a variable right up here, global underscore a number, and we're going to read what's inside of this text box, which in this case is going to be a number, but because we declare this as a var, it's going to read it in as a string. Okay. The beauty of JavaScript is that it has very loose typing, but it's also one of the weaknesses of JavaScript. But essentially what I'm going to do here is in the global declaration of this variable, notice that it's not within a function, it's within the script. I use the document, get element by ID, a number, dot value. Well, the text box up here has the ID a number, so the value entered in the text box is what's going to be assigned to the variable global underscore a number. And that is scoped so that it is available anywhere within all the functions. So if I hit show global, it's going to say global declared variable, global a number, value 1. Well, what's actually happening here is it's calling this function show global. And in show global, I simply set the inner HTML of a div to show this text. And the text is going to be the global declared variable, which is global a number, and the value, which is the important part here, the variable global a number. And notice that that variable is not declared within the function. It's declared out here outside the function. Now, here's something that's very important, and also one of the errors that I see happen all the time when people are trying to debug. If I change this number over here to 2, and I go show global, you'll notice that the value did not change. Why not? Well, this declaration of this global a number occurred on the load of the HTML. The assignment of the value also occurred on that load. Well, the default number that is actually in there, when I actually put a value in there by default, is the 1. I put the 1 there, and that's the value that's read when the HTML is loaded. Because this function show global never reads that value again, it never changes. It's still going to have the value it had by default. So this show global, okay, that global number is set there, but that declaration of that number meant that that number is assigned at the load of the page. And I see people make this mistake all the time. Why aren't my numbers changing to be what the user has entered? Well, now let's do something a little bit different here. I've got this show global read inside function, or really what you're going to do is you're going to read the value of that inside of a function. If I click that, the value changes to be 2, which is the number that I've entered. Well, what happens on this one? Well, the same thing. That button just calls this function. Now, global underscore a number is a declared variable that's a global variable. It was declared just as it was before up here, and it's the same variable that you showed here within the first function that we called. Only difference being in this case that I actually read the number within the function. In other words, it reassigns the variable. So It reads the value that's inside of this text box and it puts it in a global A number, and now it outputs that. Okay, basically sets a div to read this value back out. That's interesting because now you can see a potential, and it's not a bug, it's a potential for not having the behavior that you expected when using global variables in doing declarations. Okay, a user enters the number, okay, or that number is assigned by default. You read that number as a global, and that number never changes because you never reread it from the text box entries. Well, let's do a couple more here. I've got one called show local. This time I'm going to click show local. This is a local declared variable. And this one is a little bit different in that I have this variable local A number. Notice that this variable is declared within the function. Now this is where you get into scoping rules. This variable here, global A number, is available and visible within all of the functions. However, because local A number is declared within the function show local, it is only scope visible within that function. In other words, if I were to use it in another function, unless I pass it to that function, you do not get a value there. You're going to get undefined. Okay? Now, the last little one that I've got here is actually looking at a function call. And I have a function called read value and call display value. In this case, I'm going to declare the variable local A number here and set the value equal to the contents of the text box. And I'm going to pass that and the name of the variable as a string over to another function to be displayed. Okay? So what I do is I read it here and I pass it over. Well, because I've passed that variable over to this other function, that variable is now visible to that function. However, it doesn't have the same name within the other function. It's now just called a number. So I have my locally declared variable, the variable name, which is passed over as a string, which is the first argument of display value, and my second one, which is a number, which is going to show a number. But the value that it's going to have here is going to be the value that was read in the previous function, the function that called it, as local A number. So when I show the function call value, it does the same exact thing. The 2 goes over, I can change the value to 3. Now, it is of utmost importance to understand the concept of scoping. Where are variables available? When are variables assigned? And what has access to those variables? Good programming practice means that you want to minimize the scope of each variable. Okay? In other words, you want to make the scope as small as you possibly can, hopefully within a function, and you want to pass functions within function calls. Now, for productivity purposes, a lot of time in writing small web pages where you're just going to use specific variables, and there's not going to be a lot of variables, you'll commonly declare all the variables as global variables, and then just use them within the numbers of functions that you have within that page. And there actually is nothing wrong with doing that because it does increase the level of productivity a lot of times when you're trying to do something that's relatively simple. What you have to watch for is as you increase in complexity of your programs, having very highly scoped variables, let's say all global, leads you to the heavy possibility of having variable-based collisions. 2 variables of the same name, okay? And that's when you really want to start looking at how you're going to keep that scope down to a minimum. Within JavaScript, a lot of times it's not tremendously a worry, but at the same time, when you're working within other languages, the concept of scoping and scoping rules also applies. So a good solid understanding of scope. Okay, we only looked at 2 scopes in this case, which were global and local within functions. Okay, we also did look at some other things like how to read a value from a text box. Okay, how to declare. I have a div where I put this output. That's all within here. And how to have one function call another function and pass a variable to it. So hopefully this was useful for you guys that are just getting started in JavaScript and learning some of these rules. Okay, good programming and go at it. Thanks. Bye.